Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Mickey Baines. I'm going to be leading us through the webinar today. I want to thank you for joining me, and thank you to ACHE for allowing me to present the year's first webinar in their annual series. So I'm excited to be here, and this is a new topic for me that I've used or at least presented in the form of a webinar. So I'm excited to share this information with you today, and please feel free as we go along, if you have questions, to stop me and ask. There's no problem at all for me to pause and answer the questions that you have. This is material that I cover frequently, so sometimes I find that I go faster than other folks are ready, and I may zoom past something that's important to you. So at any point in time, please feel free to stop and ask questions along the way. So I'm just going to jump in and get started. Today we're going to be talking about the best practices and the first contact. So when a new prospective student inquires and sends information to you through a form online is where I'll focus most of the content. But if it's other ways where you're getting information, how should you respond to that? What is your best approach to follow that person to help convert and enroll them into your program? And if you're not familiar with me, if we've not met before, I'm Mickey. I'm the president of Fourth Dimension Partners. I am a consultant in higher education. I've been consulting since late 2010, very early 2011. Prior to my role as a consultant, I worked at Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania, overseeing their adult enrollment programs. I was there for 9.5 years and have been in higher education since 1998. So what feels like a few years is in reality really almost 18 years at this point. So it's hard to believe time's going by that fast. Agenda for the day. I like to always start my presentations off with a good analogy and a foundation to be sure that you understand where I'm coming from on the topic and that we're kind of all operating on the same page as we move forward and I share information. After that, we'll start looking at how to contact and how to reach out for phone. We'll look at how to reach out for email. Then we'll move on to texting. We'll look at your inquiry pool, the types of sources you're getting inquiries, and at that point in time, we should be able to wrap up and take questions. I should have a few minutes left at the end to take your questions if you have any, so please feel free to hang out afterwards with those questions. I'll be glad to answer them. Rules for the day. Important piece for me. And I experience this with clients a lot. It comes from the phrase, I can't. I'm going to at some point throw out an idea or a concept to you that you're not doing at your institution, and your gut instinct will say, well, I can't do that, or we can't do that because dot, 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 dot. And 9 out of 10 times, maybe 19 out of 20 times, when I bring that up and someone says I can't, it's not that they literally cannot do it. If challenged, they could. It's just that they quote unquote can't because there's something in their way. They don't have the time, they don't have the energy, or they don't have the practices or support to do it, and that's fine. But what I want to reiterate is in those situations, it's not that you can't do it, it's that you won't do it, that you will not do it. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you made a decision that you're not going to. So it's not a literal cannot, it's just that you will not, and that's okay. So keep that in mind. Please feel free to participate, throw your hand up, shoot a message in the chat pane. I'll be glad to answer questions along the way. Okay, so let's get our foundation going, and I'm going to start with football. And I know we're all higher education professionals here, and some of you may know nothing about football, and that is okay. Hopefully, you at least know the football player on the screen. If you don't, it's Peyton Manning, one of the most famous players in the league, who just retired after winning the Super Bowl this year. He announced recently that he'll be retiring. And I just want to kind of start with football, and I generally like to use analogies that are outside of higher education, and here's why. In higher ed, if I were to give you an example in higher ed, I included, would immediately jump into those limitations in our brain. Our creativity focuses in on a specific industry. But when I focus out of higher ed and use this as an analogy, our minds will be more open to hearing some of the messages, and we'll have fewer of those times when that I can't scenario comes forward. So let's talk about football. And as you see on the screen here, I've got a diagram of a football play. And if you don't know anything at all about football, that's okay. I'm going to explain this to you just enough so you can get to the point. As you will look here, let me fix the screen. There we go. As you look here, this first purple arrow that came up, this is the quarterback If you don't know anything about football, the O is offense, the X are defense, and the O here is the position of the quarterback. The quarterback's job is to snap the ball or have the ball snapped to him. And in this particular play, you can see the O's with the arrows pointing out. Those are the receivers. He is to pick the open receiver and throw the ball to the one that's open. In most plays, there might be a preferred receiver. In this case, it's this one here. So what he wants to do is throw the ball so that receiver catches it and hopefully maybe scores a touchdown. If we think about high school football specifically, what we know is that as you see this little O on your screen, as a quarterback at the high school level, if I can get the ball anywhere within the radius of that O, I have a pretty good likelihood that my receiver can get it. I've got a little bit of room, so if I underthrow him or if I overthrow a little beyond where he is, he has time to move and react and quickly jump or stretch out and catch the ball. And that the defender is going to give him a little more leeway than you might see in other levels because the defender may be a little slower, a little less experienced, isn't quite trained in understanding what's about to happen. But as we move to the college level, that radius that I have to get the ball to the receiver is smaller. The defender is smarter. The defender is faster. And of course, that will continue into the professional level. So the pros, we've got this very narrow window, this very narrow opportunity to get the ball to the hands of our receiver. And just to give a little more visual here, here's a photo of a high school football game. And as you see this receiver, he's kind of jumping up in the air to get it. So what has happened in this play? The receiver was running to get the ball. The ball was actually underthrown from the receiver. So he had to turn around, jump, and catch it. And while it may look like the defender here is pretty close to him, in reality, a half a second before, he was another 3 or 4 feet away. So he had no chance of stopping this pass to the receiver. And in fact, if you look at the defender's eyes, he's still searching for where the ball is in the scenario. He doesn't even know where it is. Now, let's move it forward a little bit. Here's a high school play. This is the University of Washington and Cal playing a game. And as you see, the defender's, his hand's actually touching, his hand is touching the knee of the receiver here. So he's pretty close, but the quarterback threw the ball just beyond, so the receiver had to jump and stretch to catch it. But it's at a position that the defender can't catch it. And as we look at the pros, well, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I think it's a great photo here. This is the Broncos and Cleveland Browns playing. And as you see where the ball is, if that ball had been 1 foot lower, that defender's hand could have got on it and knocked it down or had been the pass intercepted. It was a very narrow window where Peyton Manning had to get that ball right there to that receiver in order for him to be able to catch it and the defender not to be able to knock it down. And that's what we're talking about. And to kind of bring this full circle and help describe this, as we think about where we are in marketing and in recruitment of prospective students. 10 years ago, you could be operating at the high school level and do okay. But in today's world of higher ed recruitment, you need much more precision. Schools are up to speed on email. They're up to speed now. A lot of them are gaining there, at least in texting and in phone calling a prospect that inquires into a program. There's a lot more activity happening, and there's a lot more data to help us become more precise about when to send it. So if you're not paying attention to that data, if you're not thinking about when the right time to send the right message to the right prospect is, you need to be. We have to be precise. Just like we've moved, and you see how Peyton Manning's throwing this football precisely to this receiver. That's how we need to be thinking about the precision for our communication with students. And just to kind of pull back here to this football play, just to ask, who are you in this scenario? Let's kind of be sure we understand who's doing what. If you're the coach, you see the coach here on the sideline. If you're the coach, that's going to be your dean or your director, maybe a VP of enrollment possibly, who is setting up the communication plan, who's helping to determine when is the right time we want to call this prospect. When do we want to send this email out? That's the person who's making those decisions and is guiding the team along the way. The quarterback is actually your first level, your frontline recruitment staff, your admissions counselors, your enrollment advisors, those who are responsible for communicating directly with prospective students. That's the quarterback. And they're going to be the ones sending out the communication to the receiver. The receiver is your prospective student, right? And our goal here is to get the communication out so the receiver catches it, receives it, and enrolls with us. That's the goal. That's what we're trying to do. Now, quick question. Who do you think the X's are, the defense? Who is that? Well, I'm going to tell you, the defense is not an actual person. That's our radar. That's our sales radar. Those are our defenses that say, wait a minute, someone's trying to pressure me, someone's trying to push me, someone is trying to send me information I don't want or I'm not ready for to push me into enrolling, and I'm not ready to go there. Those are our natural barriers. So if you try to get the communication too early to a prospect, or if you're not wording it in the right way, if it's too long, if you're calling me 14 times the first week I inquire, I'm going to be like, wait a minute, this is a little high pressure. I'm not into this. Let me find somewhere else. And that's what the X's are there. So I referenced a few moments ago how things were 10 years ago. And really 10, 15, 20 years ago, we had a pretty standardized recruitment cycle. It would start with one of three steps. Would start with one step, and it's a three-step process. Prospects would go to the website, look at us, maybe fill out a form, but most likely call us and say, hey, I'm interested in the program. Can I set up a tour if I'm a traditional student? Or if I'm a non-traditional student, hey, can you tell me more information? Can I come in for an appointment and meet? We'd have that, and then I'd go home and I'd apply. 10 years ago, a lot of schools were still using paper applications. Thankfully, most of you now have online applications and are using them, hopefully all of you, but if not, there's a recommendation for you, number one for the day. But I would inquire and then I would apply. And once I'm accepted, if I'm accepted, then I'd be ready to enroll. It was a pretty easy process. Inquire, apply, enroll. And I would follow along your timelines because that's what you set. But as things have progressed, as technology has advanced, the prospective student, if I'm that prospective student, I've now taken control of it, and it's no longer a standardized three-step process. There are things like stealth applications now. There are multi-dimensional recruitment and advertising campaigns with digital campaigns, microsites, and visits and fairs. All of these other activities are playing in there, and so you've got different entry points to the funnel, and your funnel is becoming more complex. And I've got if you're not familiar with this concept, this is what would be your standard recruitment funnel. Now, I don't love funnels as analogies, but that's still a common analogy we use in higher education admissions today. So I'm going to use it. Now, your funnel will have multiple stages to it. Maybe your funnel is still 3 stages. I don't know. I can't speak for you on that. It should be a little more complex, but if you still have it 3, fine. If you have a reason and you know it's 3, then that's great. Some of you may have 6 stages within your recruitment funnel. Some of you may have more than 6. So I've just got a couple of photos here to kind of demonstrate that there are different levels to it. So whether it's 6 or whether it's 4, what I need you to start thinking about is to identify and define what those stages are for you. So if you have 3 stages, if you have 6 stages, whatever they are, you at least need to know what they are and define them, because that's going to be critically important as you look at your communication. So what I typically find when I'm working in school is they know that there's more than 3 stages now. They know that inquiry and applicant and enrolled student are still there. But what they haven't figured out is how to label and define those other stages. They know they exist. They're just not sure what they are. And if you don't know what they are, then you're not going to be able to communicate the right message to the right prospect, because the way the communication is going to work, and I'm going to show you this shortly, is we're going to build that communication based on where the prospect is within the recruitment funnel. So let's talk about some of the best practices and how we choose what that first contact is, what medium we use for it, what we say or type during that communication, so that we can engage someone. And to do that, I thought, well, might as well go ahead and knock out the elephant in the room, right? And then it kind of hit me, well, maybe there's more than one elephant in the room. Maybe there's elephants in the room. So sometimes people might think, well, should I call prospects? And that was my initial thought. Well, there's the elephant in the room. But there are other questions you might be asking that you want to figure out. How many times do I call a prospect? How long do I wait between those phone calls if I'm going to reach out? Should I be texting the prospect? What do I say when I call or when I text or when I email? What is it specifically that I need to say? If I'm calling, do I leave a message if they're not there? How late should I call? Should I call after 7 p.m.? Should I call before 10 a.m.? What are those times? And I thought we'd just go ahead and start putting those questions out there to get them in our mind, to be sure that we're covering them, we're thinking about them. And at the end of the day, your question to call or not to call. And we have to kind of figure that out for ourselves. And I'm going to reference here some research that I conduct every year. I do a secret shopper study every year. Last year, there were 80 different schools in the study. I will inquire with those schools and I will follow them for 6 weeks and track every piece of communication that they send to me, whether it's a phone call, the voicemail attached to a phone call, if it's an email, was it an email sent directly from a person? Was a CRM or some other automated technology used to send the email? What was the subject line? What was the topic? How long was the subject line? How long was the email? How many graphics were in the email? Who was the email from? Was it listed from a school, from a department, from a person? Was the email address something that said no reply at school name, or did it give an actual person's name? There are over 17 different characteristics about email that we track. There are, I don't know, 7 or 8 different characteristics and things we're looking at in phone calls. And then we also track snail mail. If schools still use mail, how they're using that. And so that's where I get some of this data. And one of the things I want to point out first, 46% of the institutions in our study in 2014 phoned us after we inquired. And I will tell you, I was a little surprised by that. I was expecting to see upwards of 65%. And let me, I see someone's already asking a question here. I can already see it. What types of programs or schools are involved? And that's a great question. I should have touched on that a moment ago. So this study is based almost split evenly. I mean, I would say very close to 50% both ways, of 50% non-traditional programs, 50% graduate programs. So these are all adult-based programs. Some of them are online. Some of them are hybrid. Some are straight face-to-face. And yes, the next question, some of them are for-profit institutions. There were 6 for-profit institutions out of 60 in 2014 and 12 out of 80 in 2015. When I looked at the numbers in 2014, I was surprised that it was at 46%. But what really found to be more surprising was that in 2015, that number didn't increase. It actually dropped by 8% down to 38% in 2015. It was very surprising for us. We're getting ready to launch the study in the next couple of weeks here in 2016. We're going to have over 100 institutions in it this year, and I'm excited and really looking forward to this particular number specifically to see if it increases. I do expect it to increase. I could be off again, but I do expect it to increase. So should you call prospects? If only 38% of the schools and programs that were involved in our study last year called, should you be phoning prospects? And I just always turn this question around. Do your prospects want you to call? It's not necessarily do you want to call, it might be do they want you to call. And depending upon how they found you, what their interest level was when they inquired, they may or may not want you to call. They may or may not be ready for you to call. And so then you have to think, well, if I'm going to let them determine, how can I know if they want me to call or not? And there are a couple of ways. One of the things I do in some of my clients, when we're building an inquiry form or request information form, you might ask a question on the form such as, what is your preferred method of communication? And have cell number or call me, text me, email me, mail me. Do not contact me, maybe. I don't know. I guess if filling out a form, you wouldn't have that as an option, but you can put that in there. Now, the caveat to that is if you give them that option and they don't put down phone, then by golly, you shouldn't be calling those folks because they're telling you not to. But I will just say that some of my clients will tell me that they do not have the ability to call every prospective student. So what I tried to come back with is well, let's consider if you should call. And if we think you should, maybe we can find a certain population, a smaller subset of your prospective students that you can call. Maybe it's when they apply. Maybe it's you ask a question like that on your phone, on your form, so that when they do say call, then you know specifically who to call because they're telling you to. Another way that you can go about this that may be a little more subtle than asking for a contact preference is to not make your phone field required on your inquiry form. That way, if they provide it and they didn't have to, they may be more likely. Now, obviously, they're not going to be as likely as someone who told you they preferred to be contacted via phone, but because they gave a number, some of them will put it in there thinking it's required and not pay attention, but some of them will and understand that you will call. So at least you have a smaller subset. Some people will see that it's not required and not put the information in there. And so I think that's going to be very helpful to you. And that might be a way to do that. Now, the catch to this is, if you have a phone number on there and it is not required, or the phone field is on your form and the field is not required, and someone gives you a number, you might be hurting yourself if you don't call. Because if I'm a prospective student and I want to call, I see that the number field's not required, I put in my number, I'm expecting a call at that point. So if I give you a number because it was optional and you don't call, I may be disappointed, or I might be looking elsewhere because you didn't follow up. So my recommendation, this is what I tell clients, for most clients, and this is not universal because sometimes, you know what, it's not required. You don't need to be calling everyone. So for most clients, I do recommend that you call, and then we work out and navigate, should they or can they call everyone, or should they only be calling a subset? Again, it is not a universal recommendation, just kind of depends upon the scenario, but most times, probably 8 out of 10, I would be recommending to call prospects, at least some portion of them. So when should you call them? I'm going to turn it around and ask you a question right back. If you completed a form online for a product that you were asking for a phone call, how quick of a response would you be expecting from that salesperson of that company? How soon of a call would it be that you'd be like, oh, they're creepy, I barely submitted the form before they started calling me, to how far out? So I submit it today and they don't call me by the end of the day tomorrow. Am I getting concerned or upset or frustrated? Am I looking elsewhere? What is your personal window of comfort? From as soon as possible to as far out as possible. What's that window? And then that gives you a starting point. I generally like to try to have that conversation the same day, if at all possible. And I've seen data from Learning House and Collegius out there that says, specifically for your online ad prospects, the way that I'm trying to go back here and pull that data out of my brain here because I didn't put it up on the slide. I literally just saw this data come across last week. So leads that came in through an online campaign, when they were called, if they were called, and I'm going to say somewhat aggressively here, so not a passive call waiting after a couple of days. If they can get in touch with the prospect on the first day, they had a 24% chance of converting them. If they could not get in touch with the prospect on the first day, they had a 4% chance. So the likelihood of enrolling an online prospect, someone who converted through an online ad, is 6 times higher, from 4% to 24%, if you get them on the first day. So that is a significant difference, and that explains to you why the for-profit institutions are so aggressive when they're reaching out to someone right after they inquire. Again, my recommendation, same day when at all possible, not before 9 a.m., not after 7 p.m., unless the call was directed or requested by the prospect. So if the prospect says, hey, I don't get home to 6:45, I need to have some dinner, can you call me around 7:30? Then I would call after 7 o'clock. But typically I wouldn't do that after 7 otherwise. How often should you call your prospects? Well, okay, I'll just go back to our study. In 2014, the average number of calls per institution in the study was 2.3. I expected that to be a little higher, but I did not expect it to be over like 3.5. But it was 2.3. Anyone want to take a guess? The record for the most number of phone calls by one institution to our prospective student. Anyone take a guess? I'm just going to look here in the chat pane. 10, not 10. It's a little higher than 10. Now, again, this is not in one day. This is over a 6-week period. No, not 18. Tom, good guess. It's not 25, but that's the closest. How about 41 phone calls in a 6-week period, of which 6 of them came the first day alone? And I'm not going to tell you the name of the institution. I won't throw them under the bus. I will say, as you're probably suspecting at home, that it was a for-profit institution who made those 41 calls. I'm not going to mention who it was, but realistically, you and I both know who it was. Okay, 6 times the first day, and of the 41 calls, only one, the very first one, did they leave a voicemail. Just going to let that sink in. My recommendation, never call more than twice in a day. I probably wouldn't even call twice a day unless the school is telling me, hey, we've got to be more aggressive. Then we might go there. But I typically wouldn't even do that. To me, that's a little pushy. And never more than 6 times altogether prior to the application. All right. So some folks have a communication plan that's kind of designed to lead a prospective student towards the application within 2 weeks. Some say, hey, it's within a month for us. It's up to you. I tend to like to look at the data at the institution and kind of map it out that way based on what their prospect, what their current prospects are doing. So let's look at your data. How many people inquire on this date? And it usually takes about 6.5 weeks. Let's try to get it down to 4. And we base everything around that. But 6 times, calling more than 6 times prior to the application, to me is excessive. If you wanted to call prospects, say it's been 6 months, I don't count phone calls after 6 months in that group of 6 there, because there's a point in time when you might try to follow up with what I always call dead leads, folks who kind of fell off the radar, and that might get some phone calls from you. But in that initial period, more than 6 times to me is excessive. Okay, how often should you call prospects? One of the questions I get is how long between the first and the second call should I be phoning someone? Should I leave a voicemail? Something else I get, and I just ask this. When you're calling the second time, why are you calling the second time? What makes that call different than the first? Can you add something of value to that second call that says, you know what, they're calling me back. They're not hounding me. They're calling me for some other reason that provides value. And should you leave a message? I say yes. If you don't have a good reason to call, then you don't have a good reason to leave a message. And if you can't leave a message, then that becomes kind of creepy and stalky. That is my own personal bias coming into play. I will have clients who want to call and not leave a message. That's fine. But when I find that, I typically want to look at the structure of the calls to understand what it is they're wanting to say on call 1 versus call 2 versus call 3. And if we can work on that and not script them out, but at least have some desired outcomes. So in this call, we want to accomplish this. On this call, we want to try to accomplish this. And if we know that, then that helps direct the conversation and the talking points, and that helps us understand why we can leave a message of value that is helping try to connect the person. If you are calling someone and you are leaving the same message or not leaving a message but wanting them to call you back, at the end of the day, I always come out and ask this question. If the prospect didn't call you back the first time and you're going to leave the exact same type of message and you want to talk about the exact same thing on the second call, why would she call you back the second time? If the first one didn't work, why try it again? That's another reason why, if you can find a way to differentiate the message and differentiate the purpose of the call so that you have a different message there, you might capture and talk about something that is of value to the person where they're more willing to call you back. And this is a question I always ask. I've never been with a client or even a prospective client or in a room with an enrollment management executive and where I've asked the question, what is the goal of your recruitment process? What is your main strategy? I've never been in a room or with someone I've asked that question and the answer not involved some form of this. Our goal is to build strong relationships with our prospects. Great. If that's what you're trying to accomplish in your recruitment is building a relationship, then I'm going to ask you in the second call, how does that call help build trust? Because if you're calling a second time but not leaving a message, or you're going to leave the exact same message as first, or I'm still trying to reach you, that's not adding value. I'm calling you. I know I called you yesterday, and I know I called you the day before, but I just, I haven't heard back. I just want to be sure you got my message that we can try to find a time to talk. That's not helping the prospect. That's helping you. That's not building trust. If you truly want to have a process in place that's meant to build trust, then what you need to be doing is thinking about what it is you're saying each time to provide value so that you can help do that. That's how it works. Next, texting. Should you be texting? I will tell you that obviously there are many more admissions programs using texting for the traditional undergraduate students than in the non-trad and grad world. I will tell you in 2014, of our 60 institutions in the study, 6% of them were using texting. Not a lot. But in 2015, 15%. So it was more than 200% increase. So it went from 6% to 15% in 2014 to 2015. So that's another thing I'm interested in seeing when we get into the study this year to see if that continues to grow. Um, I will tell you that texting is a medium that is now being built into some CRMs, or there are other third-party apps that can help institutions use texting as a feature and embed that into their CRM so that the texting messages are tracked and monitored and logged into each student's record. So I'm seeing that happen. I will tell you that most of the texts that are being sent are more transactional in nature, more along the lines of "We have received your request for information. We'll be in touch soon." Or even more important is that the texts are happening post application, not post inquiry, post application, and the texts are more along the lines of, "Hey, we've received your application. Be on the lookout for XYZ," or "We need your transcript." Or "We're still waiting for a reference from a guidance counselor." Those types of things are what the texts are being used for. And I will also say that the number of texts schools are sending are minuscule in terms of comparison to the number of emails that they're sending. Why is it so much smaller? Well, because most schools are only texting applicants, not inquiries. And obviously there's a much smaller pool of applicants and inquiries, and they're not using text as a primary communication feature. It's more of along the lines of, here's a message to confirm that we've done this, or that you've done this and we've received this. Email, obviously this is the bulk of where the communication occurs. And I'll tell you that I have a little threshold here that I look when I'm working with a school to kind of determine, is their email effort successful, not successful, or somewhere in between. And I have a little benchmark I use, and I get this from HubSpot, from some of their research. Now, they do a state of inbound every year, and it's a major research project they do where they kind of look at different features of email and sales and marketing, those types of things. And then they take this massive study and they break it up by industry. And so this is some data from this study focused on the education industry specifically. And they were looking at institutions' open rates. How successful are they with their open rates of their mass emails? And institutions, 60% of the institutions who said they were having declining revenue, which means numbers are dropping here, 60% of those who were underperforming said their open rates were under 15%. On the flip side, 60% of institutions who said they were growing, that the revenue was increasing, said their open rates were above 15%. So I think that's just a great starting point when I'm looking at a school to kind of help them understand, are they doing well or aren't they doing well? And we look at that 15%. Now, I will tell you, I don't like 15%. I like to see that number much higher, somewhere around 22 to 28%. If we can get into the 30s, awesome. But 15% is not great, but at least is a starting point. And if I know an institution is under 15%, I know how much more work we have to do. So some tips, things to be thinking about. The big one that I use is 5 seconds. And I've even seen data that says it's less than 5 seconds. But I just will stick with 5 seconds. When you are sending an email, when someone opens it, you need to look at what they see in the first 5 seconds. If they don't get to the point and they aren't drawn in and compelled to read that email in that first 5 seconds, they're not going to read anymore. That's the only time you have. So as you're writing an email, you need to stop before you have that final draft. You need to look at it. You need to time yourself. How long or how far into an email can you get in 5 seconds? And then you stop yourself and you look at that first 5 seconds of content, and you need to evaluate, would I want to keep reading this? And better yet, give this to your spouse, or give this to your significant other. Give this to a child, maybe, if you have a teenager in high school. Give it to someone else in your program, someone not as deeply involved as you, to say, look, read this, and cut them off at 5 seconds. Ask them where they were, and ask them if they would keep reading it based on that. I like to try to ask people outside of higher ed because we get caught up and we know our own lingo, and it's not as sound of a practice to me. I think there's a little more likelihood for bias in those situations. But 5 seconds, that is the turning point. And if they can't get to that point in 5 seconds, they won't read it. And all the time you've just spent creating this email has been wasted, because the goal is to have more people opening it. And if they can't get to that point, I can promise you they won't happen. That just won't happen. And here's a good stat I have. In fact, I just saw some more research from March of 2016 that says 55% of emails during the month of March were opened, and there were several thousand emails in this study, but 55% of emails were opened on mobile devices. And that's important because as long as an email may look in Outlook or in Gmail or in Yahoo, it looks a heck of a lot longer on a tablet and even longer on a mobile phone. So we have to think about length because length will destroy your open and your click rates. Subject lines, another great important component to your emails. 50 characters. Your subject line needs to be less than 50 characters. And if you think coming up with a tweet in 160 characters, 140 characters, whatever, if you thought that was tough, wait till you start working your subject lines. But if a subject line can't tell me what this email is about in 50 characters, it's not going to convince me to open it. And if I don't open the email, then I obviously don't read it, and then I obviously don't click on it. Again, all that time you just spent on an email would have been wasted. So we have to start thinking about those subject lines so that they are concise and to the point. So the first contact. One of the questions I like to look at with institutions when I read their first contact is, what is the goal of your first point of contact? If that's an email from your admissions counselor, if that's a phone call, what is the purpose of the email? What do you want it to accomplish? Before we make a contact, though, we have to have data about our prospect. So the first question, I'll go back to what I was talking about at the very beginning here. Where is the prospect within the funnel? Are they at the very top? And when I even look at the funnel, you might find that you have multiple funnels. I usually have 4 or 5 different funnels based upon the source that this inquiry came to us. If it's an online ad, if they came to a fair, if they saw us on a billboard and called us. These are different sources. These are different entry points in the funnel. And each of those different types of prospects have different interest levels. And the less interested they were when they contacted us, the more work it's going to be to communicate and to convert them. And so that matters. So I want to know where they are in the funnel. Then I want to start thinking, what do I know about this prospect? And from that, when I ask that, I always want to look at the inquiry form from a school to understand, how is it set up? Does your inquiry form help you recruit students, or does it hurt you in your recruitment of students? If you ask the right questions on your inquiry form, you will find that you can get the right context to make a valid and interesting communication. I won't say valid, is not the right word. That you can be more engaging, I guess is the right way. You can be more engaging in that first contact if you have context. So what I typically do is try to strip an inquiry form down. Let's take the data off that you don't need. If you tell me, for example, that you're not going to call a prospect regardless, then why are you asking for a phone number? Don't ask for it. Don't make that required if you're not going to use it. If you don't use snail mail, why are you asking for their address? It just makes your form too long. And the longer the form is, the less likely it is someone's going to complete it. And I don't mean to say that you need an inquiry form that has 2 or 3 fields on it. But having one that has somewhere between 7 and 10 fields is ideal. And what I can tell you from our secret shopper study is that's not the case. In our secret shopper study, we're seeing on average of 15.2 last year. So we know that our forms are longer than we need to be, and they're more than that optimal range. So one of the easiest ways to cut back is to look at what you're asking. Look at how it helps you convert that student, how it helps you recruit that student, and if it's providing information you use as part of the recruitment process. There are other questions I might add. I know I'm talking about taking questions off, but there are questions I might add to an inquiry form. For example, one of those questions might be, what questions are most important to you when you're trying to find a school to enroll? And I might list questions like, how much is it going to cost me? How long is it going to take me? The basic interest level questions, I'll work with a client and I'll ask them this question a lot. What are the first 3 things a prospect wants to know when they inquire? Excuse me. What are those first 3 things? And those are some of the questions I might have on there. And limit that field so that a prospect can only select 1, maybe 2 of those questions. And when you get the form in and you have those questions, you now know what they're most interested in. And you can now customize the content and the way you respond and engage the person. So rather than sending this general email out that says, hey, let's talk, or hey, what do you want to know about? How about saying, hey, I want to talk to you about how to afford awesome university because I know that's something you're interested in. Now you're providing value. Now you're starting to answer the questions that they have. And you can help connect and engage them more easily that way. So when we think about communicating through the funnel, all right, you have to be sure that your funnel is defined. So if you have 6 stages and you've only defined 3 of them, then you need to finish and define the remaining stages. They have to be defined because you're going to build your communication and the content within your communication based on where they are in the funnel. All right. And I also want to point this out. That bottom stage, that lowest stage in your funnel, that is your happily enrolled students. Don't forget to include communication to them. And I know there are other departments on campus that take over, the advisors and so forth, but you're the person who brought them in, that built that relationship with them. Don't forget to follow up after they start. We know that those first few weeks, those first few courses are the most critical courses that, and the most critical time of a student that will help prevent them from withdrawing if you can connect with them. So don't forget to have that in there. Be sure that they're getting the education they thought they were, the service they thought they were going to get, and that something's not going awry. Because you don't want to lose a student, but B, that comes back into admissions because your number one source, your number one inquiry source for prospects should be word of mouth and referrals. And if those students aren't happy and you're losing those students, you can be assured they're not going to refer students. So you want to ensure that those students are getting what they expected so that they can continue to be that referral source. And I just want to point this out. If it isn't already abundantly clear why word of mouth is so important, yes, it should be number one. But those are the students who are the prospects. Those who have been referred to your program are the ones that will be most likely to enroll at point of inquiry. They have a third-party objective person who's told them about the program, who's gotten them excited for you. They should be the easiest to recruit. And if that number dwindles and you have to build your inquiry pool back up with some other lead source, I don't care what lead source it is. If it's traditional advertisement, online advertisement, if you've bought lists somewhere, if you've gone to another, like a community college to recruit students into your degree completion program, it doesn't matter what the lead source there is. All of them will be more difficult and more complex recruitment processes than a word of mouth. So again, communication will focus on the prospect stage within the funnel. And the goal of your communication, the goal of your recruitment isn't to get the student to enroll. The goal is to get the prospect, to get that inquiry to the next stage of the funnel. So that if they're at this inquiry stage, let's get them to the applicant stage or whatever that next stage is. Let's get them to a completed application stage. So that's what the communication is driving them to do. Not to the end result, just to the next stage. It helps keep us focused. And I'm going to circle completely back around here to get back to football. Let's talk about precision again. And this is actually a photo that a friend of mine, Kevin McCloskey, took, and he would not be happy that I'm using this photo now because what he did not know when he was snapping this photo at the game, that I'll bet you the coaches on the sideline knew, was that this was about to be a touchdown. You can see where the receivers are running. I've got the arrows kind of pointing there, and I can tell you that this one defender, I move my mouse over here, this defender here is moving in to cover this receiver. And that person, this defender here for the Eagles, bit and was driving in, and that was designed specifically so that this player could then cut this way, and there would be a wide open lane for the quarterback to complete that pass for a touchdown. All right. Now, not many people, unless you're a professional football player or someone who's really into football, understand what's about to happen here. But this play doesn't work if the quarterback had already thrown the ball. Or if he waits an extra second too late and the receiver's way out here before he throws the ball, this defender's going to pick up what's happening and he's going to cross over and will intercept or knock down the pass. It won't be a completion for a touchdown. This is about precision. You see this spot right here? This is exactly where the receiver needs to catch the ball. If it's here, not a good sign. If it's back here, not going to happen. You want it right here. So this is precision, and that's what we're talking about. When you're getting communication to someone, if you send that communication too early, they're not going to receive it. If you send it too late, someone else has already given them the answer they're looking for and they've enrolled elsewhere. This is about precision, knowing your students, getting the right message to the right prospect at the right time. And if you can figure that mix out for you in your program, you will have the best timed response when you initially engage someone so that they're moving on in the process and you're not losing your leads after they inquire. And that's where I'm going to wrap up. We have wrapped up at right around about 45 minutes. So I have some time for questions. I'm going to hang out after. If you have questions, go ahead and start typing in the chat pane and we'll hang out and chat for a little bit. Otherwise, those of you who need to head on to your next meeting, feel free to jump out. I want to thank you all for joining me. Again, I want to thank the Association for Continuing Higher Education for inviting me to speak for the webinar today. And I will follow up with each of you tomorrow with the recording and the slides for the webinar so that you can reference them and share them with other members of your team who couldn't join you today. If you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. There's my website, there's my email address, and my phone number. I have no problems talking to you after or next week or tomorrow, whenever is good for you, not a problem. And again, thank you for joining me today.